Welcome back to the afternoon session of Creative Brain Week. We're delighted in this session to be joined by three really extraordinary people with very, very different areas of expertise and interests, very different ways of working. And when I've been talking to them and asking them to talk about kindness in action, quite often I've been met by complete confusion. And they've said, what's my work got to do with kindness? So partly it's a curatorial conceit. I think their work has an awful lot to do with the activating of kindness. But I think if you've been sat here this morning, you'll be able to start to make your own patterns. You'll be able to see correlation or causality or if this, then that. So I will be joined very shortly by Mike Wamaya. Mike is based in Kenya. He will join us online. He runs Project Elimu, and I won't talk about Project Elimu because he will. I'll also be joined in person by Tim Charles. Tim Charles is a health organization lead based in America with 40 years extraordinary experience. The only person I know that was a CEO of a healthcare hospital, a healthcare system, that can talk about it, because if you try to do that here, that might be more complicated. And firstly and foremostly, we are joined by Vikram Patel. And we may be able, if the technology works. Yes, fantastic. So Vikram Patel is... The way I explain it to people, because as you know, I've got a forklift truck license and a fine arts degree, is if there were rock stars in this world, Vikram would be one of them. He's currently the Paul Farmer Professor and Chair of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He answered, I think, or he addressed a question that Ganzamunga Zihindula spoke this morning, which was about how do we work when there are not the same tools available? And one of the ways he did this is he wrote a series of books. The first one, which is When There Is No Psychiatrist. What do we do when there is no psychiatrist? But I think what he brings to that is a way of reimagining and reframing. So we've been... one of the things about kindness in this room is that it's largely activated in that dark corner over there where technical people are doing wonders, working miracles. So Vikram is here to talk about reimagining mental health care, lessons from the global south. Professor Patel, you're very, very welcome to join us from India in Dublin. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm sorry for the slight technical issues, but I'm ready to go. I hope you can see my slides. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the work that we've been doing both in India, but also sharing work from many other low-resource settings around the world that demonstrate how people in communities can care for each other. And I do agree that there is no better way to describe it than kindness. But of course, being a biomedical researcher, I will often use technical words. I'm going to try and remove those words in this presentation. Next, please. These are some of the disclosures I need to make, just to acknowledge the range of different philanthropies and foundations that have supported the work that you will hear about in this presentation. Next. I want to start by a rather blunt statement by Tom Insel, a psychiatrist who led the National Institute for Mental Health, the world's largest mental health research funding body, well, at least the largest until a few weeks ago. And the words speak for themselves. And I want to just give you a sense of why Tom made such a despondent prediction about how the investments that the National Institute for Mental Health were making seem to be having no effect at all. Next. Well, let's just look at, in the US, the numbers of mental health professionals in the country. And you can see here, when you take the 10 most populous countries in the world, that if you look at the numbers of psychiatrists, and that is only one category of mental health professionals, the US has more per capita psychiatrists than any other country in the top 10 list of the most populous countries in the world, by actually quite a long shot. In fact, there are more psychiatrists in the state of New York than there are in the entire continent of Africa. So it isn't the case that actually the US is under-resourced when it comes to mental health professionals. Next. The US also spends a lot on mental health care. On this slide, what you can see here is something we don't really expect, which is to say that mental health problems account for the largest amount of spending as compared to any other group of health conditions, including things like heart disease and cancer, which we typically associate with being a very expensive set of health conditions to treat. And in part, this is because of the institutionalization of many people with mental health problems. Being in institutions is fabulously expensive, and also because of the dominance of highly specialized models of supporting people with mental health problems, typically relying on mental health professionals who cost quite a lot. Next. In spite of all this spending on research, on mental health professionals and on hospital care, what you can see here is there's been virtually no change in the prevalence of the burden of mental illness in the population over the last 10 to 15 years. In fact, if anything, in young adults, that prevalence, which you can see in the blue line, has been steadily ticking up. This is in complete contrast to any chart that you might see, for example, say for conditions like heart disease and many forms of cancer. Next. And indeed, if you take a more dismal outcome, which is dying as a consequence of poor mental health, you will see that deaths, if you combine the deaths of suicide and substance use, that they've been actually ticking up for the last 2 decades, driven by a combination of both suicide, increase in suicide, as well as an opiate and alcohol-related abuse. This has been coined as the deaths of despair, and in large part, that's of course captures the essence of why people end their own lives or drink very heavily or abuse drugs. In many contexts, that has to do with despair in their daily lives. Next. And in spite of all the money you're spending in the US, all the psychiatrists, tonight more people will call a prison or a street their home, more people with serious mental illness, that is, than in a place of healing or in a place that they may call their own home. Next. So the question really here is that why have all countries failed to address mental health needs equitably? Remember that the model that the mental health system has adopted is one that has worked really well, say for cancer or heart disease or for many infectious diseases, but it seems to have failed miserably when it comes to mental health problems. Next. This is an issue we grapple with in a piece we wrote in The Lancet a couple of years ago. And after examining a range of different perspectives and reports, next, we arrived at the conclusion that mental health needs have not been met equitably because the blind copying of the biomedical model, which has worked, like I said, so well for many other health conditions, has failed. Because mental health problems cannot simply be viewed as a biomedical condition. The reason that it's failed is led to the privileging of biological mechanisms over psychological and, very importantly, social mechanisms that lead to poor mental health. It's led to the privileging of certain kinds of interventions, especially acute emergency interventions over prevention and early intervention. It's led to the privileging of specialized care, psychiatrists, psychologists, and the whole hospital paraphernalia over an approach that embraces a diversity of people supporting one another. And it's focused very narrowly on biomedical, clinical phenomena, for example, symptoms of mental health problems, rather than what really matters to people whose mental health is impaired, which is often called recovery. And over the rest of my presentation, I'm going to refer to 2 major paradigm shifts that we call for in our analysis of the future. Next. To do that, I have to really draw upon the rich experience that comes from the global south. Parts of the world, as I mentioned, like in Africa, where there are very, very few psychiatrists and psychologists, very little money is actually spent on the formal mental health care system because, of course, there isn't one in most parts of the continent. But that doesn't mean that people with difficulties with their mental health are just wandering around getting no care at all. In fact, it means that there are very important community resources that have been harnessed and leveraged that have historically, over time, supported recovery from mental health problems. Global mental health seeks to harness some of this traditional historical knowledge, fuse that with clinical and implementation science in order to understand better how we can leverage community resources to reduce the burden of mental health problems, and very importantly, also reduce disparities in the population. Next. Based on this experience, we identify 5 paradigm shifts. I'm going to only refer to 2 in my talk. The first is to move from a focus, a very narrow biomedical focus on treatment of severe clinical presentations, to a model that recognizes the full dimensional nature of mental health, from wellness on the one hand, all the way through to disabling mental health problems on the other, recognizing also that these problems evolve in a person over time, offering very important opportunities for prevention and early intervention. Next. And related to that paradigm is therefore a shift from a very narrow focus of highly trained mental health professionals working in hospital settings to a much more diverse workforce that includes lay people and frontline providers to enhance access to evidence-based psychosocial interventions. Next. One such example of those interventions is a brief 6-session treatment we designed for delivery by lay people to be delivered in routine healthcare settings, for example, in primary care or community settings. In India, it was based on the psychological principle of activation, something you heard about a little earlier in the introduction. This is about activating people in order to engage with pleasurable and rewarding activities that they have started avoiding because in moments of extreme chronic stress, they have felt unable to enjoy or seek out those activities, breaking that vicious cycle of withdrawal and then finding yourself spiraling into a rabbit hole of despair is what is at the heart of behavioral activation. Now, I had a great video to show you about the program, but unfortunately, I can't share my slides. So, I'm going to just ask those of you who want to see the video or other materials, please feel free to email me. Next. What this slide shows you is much drier, that's the scientific findings. What it really shows you is that people with severe depression, these were people with very severe symptoms of depression. 2/3 of them got better at 3 months after just 6 brief sessions of treatment, about 2.5 hours altogether with a layperson. They stayed well up to 5 years later, indicating that 2/3 of people with very severe depression could be helped to recovery by a talking treatment that focused on activation delivered by a layperson in their own neighborhood primary healthcare center. Next. This body of science has actually been replicated in a variety of settings. Here you can see a picture of a similar program that was run in Zimbabwe. It was called the Friendship Bench. And it's called a Friendship Bench for obvious reasons. As you can see here, the lady on the right is delivering another 6-session treatment based on a simple technique of problem solving to the lady on the left, who is a mother who has been identified as having severe symptoms of depression or anxiety. She's been referred by the nurse in the primary health center, which you can see at the rear. The clinic is extremely crowded. You can see people sitting on the floor there. And so the supportive counseling is provided in a bench that's been erected in the garden of the clinic. This is being run in Zimbabwe, in the capital city, Harare. Harare is blessed with very great weather. And so for most of the year, you can have this outdoor therapy bench, as it were. The innovators also ran clinical trials, as we did for the Healthy Activity Program, and reported large and sustained benefits in the improvement of the mental health of these individuals. Now, you might be wondering who the woman who's delivering therapy is. As I mentioned in my trial, in India, is lay people from the local community. This is the same. She happens to be a grandmother from the neighborhood in Harare where the health center is located, and the grandmothers were then trained, and then they provided this intervention. This body of evidence is so large now that it's actually transforming the way we think about mental health care. Next. Now, people in wealthy countries like North America, one wonder, is this kind of like, grassroots community-based approach really relevant for the US and Canada, where there are so many mental health professionals, in spite of the fact that, of course, as I mentioned to you earlier, with all those mental health professionals, none of the metrics that we would judge as being an important metric of success of the healthcare system seem to have shown any change. So just recently, a major study was completed in 3 sites in North America, in Toronto, Chicago, and Chapel Hill, in which the same treatment that I mentioned earlier that we designed in India was adapted for delivery to mothers who were depressed. And the investigators were looking at 2 comparisons. Did non-specialists, doulas, midwives, and others achieve the same results in terms of remission and recovery from depression as more specialized psychologists and psychiatric providers? And the other one was comparing telemedicine with in-person. Next. The findings were published in Nature Medicine earlier this year, and lo and behold, what did we find? Essentially that there's no difference. Non-specialist providers working in perinatal settings like doulas did just as well as psychiatrists and psychologists to deliver this evidence-based treatment. Next. Of course, the benefits of this approach go well beyond improving access to mental health support to reach the last mile. It also frees up specialists to work at the top of their license. Remember when I showed you that 2/3 of people with severe depression remitted and stayed well for 5 years? Well, 1/3 did not. And I guess one could argue that this shows that one size does not fit all when someone's mental health is impaired. And we need to be able to provide, first and foremost, a low-intensity intervention that is driven by the community, but also make sure that there are more specialized providers available for those individuals who need that kind of care. Of course, this kind of approach reduces stigma because it's so much more acceptable to receive care from somebody you identify with, who speaks exactly the same way you do, who lives in your own neighborhood, and oftentimes, in the case of community health workers, also provides other kinds of social and healthcare support. And we've documented very powerfully how much this approach empowers and benefits the providers. Next. What this body of science is showing is how we can redefine mental health care in 4 critical ways. It redefines what is a mental health intervention. It doesn't need to be a medication. It doesn't need to be a very complicated psychotherapy. Brief, low-intensity interventions that are grounded in social support are as effective as some of the more expensive and technically sophisticated interventions. They can be provided where people are, not necessarily in clinics. They can be provided by anyone in the community who has received additional or specialized training to do this kind of support. And ideally, this kind of support should always be seen as an extension to the formal mental health care system and not a replacement, because really, as I mentioned earlier, one size does not fit all. The majority of people out there can benefit. The next slide, please. All of this body of science has now been embraced by a range of different actors around the world. Major scientific journals like The Lancet, World Health Organization reports, and so on. But also, next, you will see the same this evidence also being embraced in North America. Next. And you can see this in the RAND Corporation report here, which shows the wonderful title of this report, Helpers in Plain Sight. Next. So the key question now is, how do we build the skills at the base of the pyramid in the community to deliver support to others in their community who may be struggling with mental health? Next. And I've been working on this with the Empower program at Harvard Medical School that we launched 5 years ago, that is seeking to accelerate the translation of this evidence by using a range of digital tools and techniques to enable people in the community to learn, master, and deliver quality-assured psychosocial interventions. Next. We envisage in Empower that in order to really become good at what you're doing, you have to go through stages. You've got to learn a technique, what I might call the learner's learning phase. You've got to then practice that technique under supervision, what I might call the internship phase. You then have to undergo some tests to see whether you really know what you're supposed to do, what I might call then a credentialing phase. And then finally, as you are working in the community, supporting others, you will graduate to becoming an expert. Next. We use technology in Empower in many different ways. For example, digital curricula, which are competency-based, remotely delivered supervision, remotely delivered competency assessments, and now with the advent of large language models, using large language models to improve real-time assessment of the quality of care that people are receiving, but also linking the outcomes that people who are beneficiaries are experiencing with the quality of care. Next. We have a number of different mental health conditions that we are targeting through Empower: depression through the behavioral activation treatment I mentioned earlier, emotional problems in young people through a step care intervention that includes a single session intervention, recognizing that young people, particularly adolescents, really don't want to be spending much time in front of a therapist. What they really want is something that helps them get on their feet in the moment. For people with serious enduring mental illness, peer support interventions. For children with autism, a parent-mediated intervention. And for people who face an acute traumatic event, again, a single session intervention that can be delivered in the moment. Next. We've been scaling up the Healthy Activity Program, which I mentioned earlier, in rural India, using the Empower platform in partnership with a large state government of a large state in central India called Madhya Pradesh. Next. And I'm also delighted that we also are doing similarly work in Texas with a range of different partners. Our work in Texas began in a partnership with the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, thanks to a prize we won called the Lone Star Prize. But now it's expanded way beyond that. And now we also are working very excitingly with the Congregational Collective, which is a coalition of churches in Texas. And here what we're doing is harnessing the calling that members of faith-based congregations have to support others in their community by layering onto that existing resource the technical skills that members of the congregation can learn to support those in a more effective way. And my last slide coming up. So business as usual, I would like to argue, will not succeed in reducing the burden of mental health problems or disparities, but we have a real way forward. Diverse scientific disciplines show and point the way to a radically different approach to prevention and care. I haven't spoken about prevention, but in fact, you also see very similar evidence in prevention. And that is really through working through frontline providers and community members in a collaborative care framework that connects the mental health services with frontline workers. What's great about these actions is they don't require any new human resource. For the most part, they rely on resources every community and country already has, which is people who care for one another. Kindness, once again, at the heart of this idea. Thank you very much.
Professor Patel, thank you, and thank you for ending with a statement which sets up the rest of our afternoon, activating what already exists in many communities. Do you have a few minutes for questions, possibly? You do, right.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. We hope we shall, 5 or 10 minutes. Is there anybody out there in the darkness with a question? From where I'm standing, I'm glared by lights. I have a question I might ask while we're having a think. Professor Patel, what are the challenges in working with the US healthcare system as it is and taking a practice that you've developed in India? What has been your experience of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I have to say that would have been one of my concerns. Would people in places like Texas be open to the idea of getting innovations that really rely on community resources and resilience? Actually, it turns out faith-based communities have been doing that for a long time. We just didn't, it's like hidden in plain sight in a way, you know, that members of faith-based congregations have spent more than a century actually doing exactly the same thing. They do it, of course, using a very different calling. It's not a medical or a health thing. They're doing it out of love and compassion and supporting others. But they're also extremely enthusiastic of baking into what they are doing some techniques and principles that are grounded in science. And so to my very pleasant surprise, I found people embracing this idea because it's not foreign. It's not coming from somewhere else. It's completely homegrown. And so, in fact, it's not been a challenge at all. I'll tell you what really the challenge is. The challenge is not in local communities. The challenge is in the more hierarchically structured medical community.
Ooh, it's close.
The daily life. Oh dear.
You were saying the challenge is in the medically structured communities.
The medically structured world likes to biomedicalize people's suffering. And by biomedicalizing it, they also then are very territorial. They own that problem. And giving up or expanding the idea that you can help people recover without a MD degree or a PhD requires some giving up of power. So I think that is where I found there to be more resistance. Although, to be quite honest, given the scale of mental health problems in America today, I think that resistance is disappearing very quickly. People do realize we need more innovative grassroots approaches.
And aligned with that, when you are dealing with a hierarchical system that evaluates and measures and therefore releases resources, how do you make the case? Are you evaluating using different metrics? Are you using narrative and qualitative and quantitative? How does that work?
Yeah, you're right. It's always mixed methods, I mean, it's always, to ask people how they feel about the support they receive. Narrative data is the most powerful. There's no question. Now, when I talked earlier, not just the beneficiaries, but also the providers. What's really interesting is the other concern people would have is, are you dumping onto ordinary people, lay people, something that they're professionally not trained to do? And actually, again, this is about the tension between the professionalization of care and compassion versus something that we all, from an evolutionary perspective, we are social creatures. And in order for our own survival, we need to connect and support others. This is deeply, I would say it's hardwired in our DNA. So I think, but we have to demonstrate, are we adding too much work, or is that causing stress? Is there stigma attached to that? And all our narrative data shows that, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. Actually, I'll tell you one of the most poignant things I often hear from my frontline worker colleagues who are starting to do this work is how they have this epiphany. Oh my God. So this is what happened to me when I had my baby. I went through months and months of shame and suffering because I was feeling the way I did. I couldn't share this with anybody. And now, through this training, I've understood, oh my God, this is what was happening to me. And they would have this kind of sense of joy that they finally could have meaning as to what happened to them years ago. So I think it's always mixed data. Of course, for the more biomedical community, they like to see numbers. So, what are the recovery rates? And those are usually quantified in numbers. And you triangulate these two kinds of data in order to really get a full picture of what's happening.
There's a beautiful echo in what you've just said from the research that we were listening to this morning about kindness, that one of the benefits of kindness in offering it and activating it is the reciprocal feelings that you feel in yourself. That what we do in doing this work is undo some hierarchies which are perhaps no longer useful for the work that we're trying to do. They simply get in the way. I have one last question for you, which relates to what we're going to be talking about in the rest of the afternoon. We have loosely encountered each other because we are both working on some pieces for the Lancet around the uses of arts. And you've made some fantastic points about those. I wonder whether you might touch on one or two of those. You had some doubt about them, I think.
Yeah, but, for me, the arts are such an important example for grassroots cultural a resource that can help people find meaning in their lives. And that is in itself one of the most important goals for people struggling with their mental health, is meaning and purpose in their lives. I think the key point I'll make is that we have to be careful not to have a very ethnocentric perspective of what we mean by the arts. In many parts of the world, I split my life between India and the US. In the US, if you use the word arts, it typically means something that involves the spending of money. Buying a ticket to a museum or buying a ticket to go see a musician. But actually, in many parts of the world, arts are actually part of everyday life through cultural and religious activities. And this is especially true in India. So very few people I know in India would go to a museum, and leave aside even buying a ticket to go to a museum. It's a very foreign idea to go to a museum. I'd say less than 0.5% of India's people actually visit museums. Or buy tickets to go see concerts. But there is music and art in everyone's everyday life, in the form of crafts, for example, or in the form of rituals that typically will involve dance or will involve singing and chanting and so on. I think we have to recognize that the human need to engage with cultural activities is deeply integrated in societal behaviors, and it does not need, again, a professional way of thinking. Of course, that helps, but I think my main comment has been that we do need to recognize the cultural and historical essence of arts in everyday life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So we need to keep moving swiftly around. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Tim Charles. And as you make your way, I can explain a little bit. In fact, no, I won't. I'll just let you do that.
Okay.
I'll just introduce you. There you go. Yes.
So, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm going to step into this maybe in a slightly different manner, into this conversation. I'm going to walk you through kind of a wider lens, take you through a wider lens view of some elements that we deal with in the U.S. that you might conclude are actually examples of unkindness. Before I get to a couple of examples of specific initiatives that we've undertaken that do reflect kindness. But I'm going to begin with a quote. And the quote is a quote of Mark Twain, who, as I'm sure you all know, was a wonderful author and satirist in the U.S. And the quote is this: "The two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you know why." Now, for many of us, that second question is a bit mysterious and disconcerting. And fortunately, we find models that help us begin to uncover and discover what that may be. And I want to tell you a bit about one of those models for me. And that model actually lived at 64 Bagot Street. And her name was Catherine McCauley. What Dominic didn't share with you is that my previous life, and I say previous life because I'm now retired, was as president and CEO of Mercy Care Service Corporation, Mercy Medical Center, a variety of clinics, surgery centers, et cetera, in the heartland of the U.S. And this was an organization that was founded by the Sisters of Mercy. I was struck by the fact that one doesn't need to be Christian, one doesn't need to be Catholic, one doesn't need to be religious in any way to appreciate the contribution that she made, that her one life made to education, healthcare, kindness, and compassion. And not in simply considering the issues, but actually in taking action. At the heart of her ministry was deep kindness, hospitality, welcoming strangers, no longer perceiving persons as strangers. This I've come to appreciate is what this gathering, the Creative Brain Week, is all about. And I am grateful to be with you as a curious participant in activating kindness in being hospitable. Catherine's legacy is thousands of ministries, founded in countries worldwide, many dedicated to ensuring access to needed health care for all, and in particular the sick poor. Her personal example and clarity of mission influenced and shaped me in my role as president and CEO. Given the policy debates underway in my country, I find today that I am in a challenging place. Compassionate healthcare, to which I had dedicated myself, informed by the mission of Catherine and her sister, now faces the strongest threat I can recall. We are losing our way. I am sure you know that the U.S. health system is a cobbled and imperfect construct. It borrows from the Beveridge model in the UK, the Bismarck model of Germany, the Universal model of Canada, and sadly, for one of the world's wealthiest nations, we will also continue to mimic the out-of-pocket model of our world's poorest nations. While seeking solutions in the experience of others' innovation, the U.S. has overlooked the profoundly important underlying principle existent in these models, the moral commitment to ensure access for all to affordable, equitable, fairly allocated health resources. The attempt, once and for all, to rectify this in 2010 with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, or better known either affectionately or derisively as Obamacare, fell short. The business model, or some might say the greed model, endemic to a market-driven healthcare system, prevailed then and has intensified today. And again in the U.S., we find the most vulnerable in the crosshairs of the budget cutters. And this time, it's not simply the impoverished under siege in Congress's big, beautiful bill. It's also those aging, if DOGE's agenda plays out. We are debating again whether progress made in expanding coverage, diminishing the exclusion of millions, was an overreach. We just can't afford it is repeated over and over as justification for the retreat. Sadly, I fear we will just turn a blind eye. And this brings to mind the often quoted sentiment that, quote, our greatest tragedy is not the poverty itself, it's the indifference to it. What has long been appreciated by so many of developed nations as a fundamental moral commitment will be again a bridge too far for one of the richest. After 46 years, my career in healthcare delivery concluded on December 31st, 2022, and I retired against this backdrop. And although the prevailing common view suggested it would be completely acceptable for me to walk away and let it go, I was clear that I was not done. There was still much work to be done. But what was my focus to be? And as I said to myself often, all change begins within, and that I needed to go within to do a deep dive and reinvent. So I've read, written, painted, sculpted, consulted, mentored, and taught as I searched for a new presence, identity, and purpose. And the path became not unlike the Camino, a 225-mile trek in Portugal and Spain my wife and I undertook in the early months of my retirement. Rising each day, taking step after step into an unknown new future. Along the coastal route, the path we chose, are blue tiles with engraved cockle shells and embossed yellow arrows pointing the way. These familiar and comforting signs would from time to time disappear. And invariably in these chaotic moments of feeling lost, a stranger, a guide, would appear and point us in the right direction. When a sign didn't come, we persevered in the face of the unknown with conviction. I repeated to myself something the Buddhas purported to have said. What you are is what you have been. What you will be is what you do now. What am I to be and what am I to do were the central questions of this literal Camino, as it is now in my pursuit of reinvention and to answer Twain's second most important question, why am I here? Fortunately, I'd maintained a discipline adopted late in my career, writing each morning, every morning. And these sessions were not so much about capturing my life story as one might in a diary. This daily practice is now of centering, of coming to a moment of yes as to the day's purpose. Sitting with pen in hand, sometimes in the pre-dawn darkness, or listening to the cacophony of the morning birds, a creative process takes hold. I stand in a mental clearing and evoke an emergent future. in which my active participation is essential. And this practice ignites my day. For the better part of the past 25 years, I have also been painting wild, untrained, abstract works. This provided an apt metaphor for the process I was undertaking as I viewed the passage into the latter years of life as a blank canvas, beckoning me to express new creative possibilities in being an aging human being. My painting, and this is coming from a guy steeped for decades in the spreadsheets of business, is a way into, as is often spoken in aesthetics, it brings me closer to my subject with empathy. These practices also reinforce my belief, as John Shar once said, quote, that the future is not a choice of alternative paths offered in the present, but is a place that is created. First in the mind, then the will, and created next in action. Thus, I began to recontextualize the term retirement, which I view as outdated, unhealthy, and in need of contemporizing. I pursued a new narrative for the possibility in being an older adult, and it was time to refire, not retire. And to my great relief, an answer emerged after about 18 months, in part as a result of an impactful conversation last spring here in Dublin with Dominic Campbell over lunch, a walk, a discussion of his work, this work we were all engaged in this week. This next leg of my life journey revealed itself, and it is to reframe the conversation and possibilities for older adults who just happen to be the fastest growing, most undervalued, and increasingly vulnerable persons in my community, my home state of Iowa, and my country. In the U.S., 11,000 boomers are entering the post-65 years, entering their post-65 years every day. This phenomenon is creating the super age, as Bradley Sherman insightfully discussed in his 2023 book by the same name. This occurs when a community has more residents over the age of 65 than under the age of 21. This describes the current or near-term reality of the heartland of rural America. Creative insights live on the edges for me, in the periphery of my attention. I'm often startled because when something becomes apparent, it's as if it has always been present. It's just I had not seen it. And this describes my experience at landing upon the 5 domains of aging that now have my full attention. Older adults have always been there. I just hadn't seen their conundrum in quite the same way. It led me to found and register a new company, Aging Life Design, and these are its goals. 1, repurpose retirement, moving from a time of being forgotten to a time of consequential engagement, or as Rutger Bregman might say, reclaimed moral ambition. 2, reform healthcare to better meet the needs of our older adults, in particular those living with dementia. 3, redress aging into poverty, overcoming the often invisible dread of our older adults in choosing between heat, food, or medicine. 4, redesigning housing, enhancing the life of our elders by eliminating fear of evictions, isolation, and segregation, and finding intergenerational inclusion and worth. And lastly, to rebut ageism, addressing head-on all of the biases that lead to the other 4. I will tell you, I am told often that these are gigantic and unrealistic, and they face terrible headwinds beyond my capacity to make a difference. Just considering the impact of ageism It's negative social stereotypes, workplace discrimination, media, image media disdain, exclusion, denial of self-efficacy and agency is enough to turn back. And I'm also told I may have this all wrong, that most people just want to stay young by any means, be happy, and live a long, comfortable life. A longer life is one of the greatest gifts of our modern time, for heaven's sakes. But I've observed something quite different. For too many, their lived experience is running afoul of the extraordinary promise. I simply can't turn my eyes and look away from the stark realities of so many of my fellow older adults for whom there are very real challenges. And I'll describe a few. The gift of longevity isn't shared equally by all of us. In 2012, there were 43 Americans over 65. This increased to 58 million in 2022 and will hit 88 million by 2060. We are reminded that the life expectancy of human beings has grown impressively. From the Bronze Age, it was 18. It rose to 22 during the Roman Empire. And when the U.S. declared its independence in 1776, it had risen to 36. And now we stand at 77.5. But not for all. This depends upon gender, race, socioeconomic status, and where you find yourself geographically. We may live longer. However, the gap between health span and lifespan varies significantly due to poverty, lifestyle, access to health care, livable communities and housing, and loneliness. On average, men in the U.S. live to be 74 years old with 11 years of gap between their lifespan and their health span, and that gap is in fair and poor health. If you're a woman, you may live longer to 80, but the gap widens to 14 years. And the reality is worse for some. If you're a person of color or Native American, your expected lifespan is in the 60s, with 16 of those in just fair or poor health. And what of this 20th century notion of retirement? Is it really good for us in the 21st century? Ironically, today, many communities like mine are seeing a net out-migration of young persons. We're scrambling to find skilled and educated workers to fill essential jobs, while older adults are struggling with a loss of purpose, necessary income, and isolation. In 1900, 63% of the U.S. population over 65 was in the workforce. This declined steadily to 16% in the 1980s. It bumped up a little bit to 19% in 2023 due to the fact that women were staying in the workforce longer. But these trends were driven significantly by an attitude that the old must make way for the young. In 1935, in the U.S., Social Security was introduced and offered a livable guaranteed income. Medicare's health care coverage was instituted in 1965 for those over 65, and these were intended to insulate the older population from want in their retirement. And it worked. I recall my grandfather commenting that because of Social Security and his modest pension, he was actually better off than when he was working. This very safety net instituted as a means of lifting our older persons out of poverty is steadily being eroded. Today, 33% of white persons and 65% of black persons will experience a life course event that will throw them into poverty. And by age 75, 50% of all persons will have experienced poverty in some form for some period of time. One such life course event is illness. The average out-of-pocket health care expense for those 65 and over in the course of their remaining life is estimated to be $400,000 per couple. And that's split 80-20 between direct care and long-term care. Although that $400,000 looms large on the horizon, only 25% of the there are 25% of retirees that have no savings at all. And the median savings for most families that are retiring is just $87,000. And this risk is compounded if you're on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, as you are significantly more likely to utilize the healthcare system. And then where will we live out those final years? If you're wealthy, of course, you can afford an all-inclusive resort-like senior living residential community. If you're financially somewhere in the middle class, aging in place that is remaining in one's home is the most practical option. Although one of the challenges in our residential architecture, which was designed for a population of agile, mobile people. It's been determined that a mere 10% of our homes have been built to accommodate for the mobility and safety needs of older persons. In my home state of Iowa, if you're a couple at the lower income level and you're living on about $33,000 a year with few assets, you may be eligible for Medicaid coverage for long-term care. And Medicaid being the healthcare financing system introduced in 1965 for the working age and older poor. This daunting system varies considerably depending on what state you live in. We actually find older persons and families strategizing how to dispose of assets and income to qualify for long-term care when that becomes essential. And if these potential life events weren't enough, our longevity is throwing additional curveballs our way. According to the Center for Disease Control and the American Association of Retired Persons, there are 53 million unpaid caregivers in the U.S., and their work is valued at $470 billion annually. A 2024 RAND study focusing on caregiver needs for veterans actually doubled that estimate to over 100 million unpaid caregivers. There are 11.5 million of these that are caring for persons with Alzheimer's. And it's probable that you are either a caregiver, you'll be a recipient of care, or will be both. It is well documented that assuming the caregiver's role is stressful, chaotic, costly, and reduces the life expectancy of the caregiver. And our entire social and health system is dependent upon these unpaid resources. Our living longer has also brought with it an increasing presence of those living with dementia, as we have been discussing. I am not a scientist or a clinician. While I read the literature and learn from these experts, I am also informed by those perhaps more philosophical and by my own observation of dear friends and a 98-year-old mother in the throes of this reality. As I was researching future health trends more than 15 years ago, I attended a conference focused on the future of neurosciences at the Cleveland Clinic. I was alerted to the growing public health concerns about dementia. Honestly, I hadn't thought much about it at that point because I was preoccupied with cancer and cardiac services as we were developing centers of excellence. I left that symposium curious as to what was happening in my community and my own hospital's long-term care facility on campus. A step in this investigation was to invite John Zeisel to Cedar Rapids. And if you aren't aware of him, he's the author of I'm Still Here. He is an ardent challenger of prevailing thinking about care and housing of those living with dementia. The purpose of his visit was to guide us in assessing the prevailing models of memory care within our local community, and specifically Mercy's own memory care resources. The tour of these resources shocked, saddened, and angered me. I observed rows of persons in wheelchairs, parked in front of big screen TVs, over-medicated, semi-somnolent. I felt ashamed as I confronted my own ignorance and indifference and given what we're talking about here, my own lack of kindness. Memory care, I had to conclude, was a euphemistic term that cloaked a reality of persons mostly older with little opportunity for a quality of life and held without due process behind locked doors. It's for their own safety. That was our justification. It shook me to my core. I would say I lost my indifference that day. The writings of John Swinton, a professor of practical theology and pastoral care at the University of Aberdeen, became one of my guides in trying to sort all this out. He describes cognitive functioning loss in this way, and I quote, "They are losing what society prizes. Receiving such a diagnosis puts people in a tricky position which has both neurological and social implications. Definitions aren't value neutral. They are values forming." End of quote. These memory care units that I toured spoke volumes to our values. Swinton goes on to challenge several of the prevailing views, and these were compelling to me. And I quote, "Dementia, along with its psychosocial neurological disease characteristics, has a significant linguistic and relational component. Dementia doesn't entail a loss of mind. Rather, it provokes others to presume loss of mind. Dementia doesn't entail a loss of self. Understood properly, the self remains intact. Even in the most severe forms of dementia, any loss of self relates to a failure of community. Some of the symptoms, such as aggression, depression, withdrawal, anxiety, deterioration in emotional control and motivation, when understood properly, can be seen as a reasonable response to different frightening and frustrating situations. And again, I'm a layperson. These distinctions, however, open my eyes to the fact that the person is still present. As an aside, John Swinton's book, Dementia, Living in the Memories of God, is an informative and eloquent theological inquiry into dementia. And he ends, much like Catherine, focusing upon hospitality as central, kindness as central, to welcome and love the stranger, no longer seeing them as a stranger. My personal awakening, so to speak, led me to direct Mercy Medical Center toward trialing and testing new approaches. While leading the organization, I led the foundation for initiatives to begin addressing these needs, reframing our approach to our aging population, and in particular caring for and supporting those with dementia, as well as their unpaid caregivers. The first initiative was the opening of the Family Caregiver Center of Mercy. Last Thursday, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the opening of the center. Those that have set foot inside the center are enveloped by its uniqueness. In 2014, I asked a retired social worker, Kathy Good, whose husband Dave was in our care with an advanced form of dementia, if she would join us in developing a family caregiver center. The mission of the center would be to provide emotional and practical support to family caregivers in recognition of the mental and physical toll it takes upon the quality of life of the caregiver and the complexity in meeting the everyday needs of care recipients in our complicated and convoluted system. As there was little recognition of the importance of this, nor funding within the formal healthcare or social services, this initiative would require philanthropic support. It was in our exploratory phase that we encountered narrative upon narrative of the adverse consequences for caregivers, unyielding stress, financial burdens, inflexible and insensitive employers, complex governmental processes, and isolation. what we thought would raise perhaps $1 million resulted in gifts of $2.5 million, a sufficient corpus to launch in December 2015. Kathy, along with her personal support team, her kitchen cabinet, as she called them, were the skeletal staff of volunteers that set out to be this first unique new resource. The Family Caregiver Center has become more than just a place. It's a community for and by caregivers of adults living with chronic conditions. These include predominantly dementia, but also cancer, arthritis, Parkinson's, diabetes, heart conditions, and more. Caregivers gain access to unbiased resources and emotional support led by professional staff and volunteers, most of whom have a lived experience. Over the years, they've supported over 3,600 caregivers and families. The Family Caregiver Center has grown in sophistication and resources as well. These include one-on-one meetings, support groups, educational events and sessions, resource lists, and a lending library, as well as an online community. The Family Caregiver Center became the seed of the next evolution, and that was the creation of the Chris and Susie DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia, the mission of which is reframing our understanding of aging and the common approach to dementia. We traveled, visiting examples of innovative models such as Abe's Garden in Nashville, Tennessee, the Schlegel Villages in Waterloo, Canada. We sought out those who had already blazed the trail. And once again, Cedar Rapidians generously reinforced that this was an idea whose time had come for our community with our next phase of our capital campaign, in which we were able to raise $14 million in local charitable contributions, sparked by a gift from the DeWolf family. The DeWolf Innovation Center is located in a converted church, physically linked to a new 237 residence senior living community located on a 40-acre site surrounded by cornfields in eastern Iowa. The linking of these two facilities is believed to be the only one of its kind in the U.S. So the center houses the Family Caregiver Center, a dementia diagnostic resource, the Mercy Center for Memory Health, Community Connections, which is a day respite program for persons with dementia, the Connections Club, which is a hub for small facilitated groups of persons living with early stage dementia, a smart showroom of technology, furnishings, and tools specifically designed for aging in place, and a myriad of facilitated communities and cafes linking individuals on site as well as remotely to educational and support resources. Under Kathy's studied curation as its first director, the center was designed to create a visual demonstration of best practices in colors, floor coverings, artwork, which research has shown to be conducive to those living with dementia. It also has a stage upon which the Together in Song chorus, a choir made up of those living with dementia or Parkinson's and their caregivers, perform. The chorus has grown from 25 to 70. Curiosity, continuous learning, and trialing innovative approaches are at the heart of the center's evolution of new models that support both professional and lay caregivers in understanding how best to communicate and interact with those living with dementia and their caregivers. And we have not done this alone. There have been thought leaders that influenced and trained our team as it defined and redefined its evolving offering. At the outset, Dr. Alan Powers jump-started our commitment to transformation and innovation. On multiple visits, he spoke to our community and trained our providers. He introduced us to his paradigm-changing work in moving away from pharmaceutical psychotropic management of dementia. All this captured in his book, Dementia Beyond Drugs, Changing the Culture of Care. He advocated our use of the Eden alternative domains of well-being, which are identity, connectedness, security, autonomy, meaning, growth, and joy. He stressed that many of the behaviors we find so challenging are expressions of unmet needs. Our task is to decode distress. We also brought Daniela Greenwood from Australia to Cedar Rapids. She challenged our methods, which were deeply ingrained in the aloof, paternalistic medical model. She emphasized the importance of deep relationships between staff and residents, resulting in trust, comfort, and more person-centered experience, leading to a feeling valued as a full human being. Like Powers, she believes that behaviors are expressions of unmet needs. For Daniela, this wasn't just about a new model. It was about a fundamental human right. Along with the influence of Powers and Greenwood, the DeWolf Innovation Center engaged Judy Cornish to provide training in her DAWN method, which stands for Dementia and Alzheimer's Wellbeing Network. Her model provides clear, practical tools within a compassionate framework to foster well-being, dignity, and companionship for individuals living with dementia. Rather than attending to the symptoms and deficits, the focus is on strengths and cherishing the whole person. More recently, Jennifer Carsons of the University of Nevada's DEAR method is informing caregivers of alternative communication and experiential approaches, and this is being layered into the center's programming. The image of the deer is intended to associate the approach to qualities of being present, the awareness of one's surrounding, and gentleness, all of which are needed when supporting persons with dementia. Carson emphasizes engaging with those living with dementia as partners. She emphasizes focusing upon strengths, opportunities for meaning and purpose, and not the tragedy of the disease. All this requires radical change in our existing culture within the medical and long-term care systems. A current focus of the center is upon the development of an inclusive living model for those living with dementia within established senior living communities. The intent is to unlock the doors and offer an alternative to the segregation, isolation, and seclusion, which is ubiquitous in memory care units throughout the U.S. A centerpiece for the DeWolf Innovation Center is its annual forum. Last fall's keynote was Dr. Jeremy Nobel, who spoke from his recently published magnificent book, Project Elimu. He echoed the now recognized worldwide concern described by the World Health Organization and the U.S. Surgeon General as epidemic. Lonely people have a 30% greater likelihood of dying earlier. Mother Teresa once said, the most terrible poverty is loneliness. Loneliness is defined by Nobel as the gap between the connections we would like to have with others and what we actually experience. He describes it as a signal, not unlike hunger and thirst. He distinguishes between psychological, societal, and existential loneliness. Navigating it can be tricky. Not heeding the signals is purported to increase the risk of dementia by 40%. But here's the way out he offers. And the simplicity of this is elegant. Nobel's simple three-step interventions turn the tide. Imagining a positive place, engaging in a creative expression of it, and then sharing it with somebody. When he speaks, his lectures are most often coupled with an exercise involving the process. Imagine your joyful place. Now draw it, or write a haiku about it. Turn to the person next to you and share. He hacks loneliness. The DeWolf Innovation Center published a work itself involving the art of a watercolorist as inspiration from poetry written by caregivers. Creative experiences in the context of Nobel's creative circles are becoming the means of community building and diminishing loneliness. And Basting will join us this November for our 4th annual forum. In 2020, in her 2020 book, Creative Care, A Revolutionary Approach to Dementia and Elder Care, she describes her intentions this way, quote, to embolden our steps with the hope and confidence that we can connect to the people we fear are lost to us, that we can create and experience meaning and joy along the way. Learning to invite someone into imagination has the power to transform our relationships. It also has the power to change the way we think about aging and late life and the very systems we built to control and support late life. End of quote. They are all tapping into the lighting up of the brain that occurs in the creative act as researched, as we heard about yesterday at NYU, but also such places as the Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics at Johns Hopkins, which is captured in a wonderful book, Your Brain on Art. The research and studies show that aesthetic experiences activate brain regions involved in empathy, emotional processes, all things kind. And as we all know, dementia is a growing public health concern due to our aging population in the U.S., with estimates of 7 million persons currently living with Alzheimer's growing to 13 million in 2050. Given the magnitude, urgency, and consequences, the DeWolf Innovation Center is moving down a new path, and that is taking advantage of virtual and AI technologies to scale and make its resources and expertise available to any community, in particular rural communities intent upon standing up similar resources in addressing their local needs. One step in our reaching a larger audience is this fall's November 19th forum will be live streamed. Ann Basting, Jennifer Carson, and Dr. Gayatri Devi from New York will be presenting live and virtually along with others. And I'd like to invite you to join us. So let's return one more time to Bagot Street. And imagine it's December 12th, 1831. This is the foundation day of the Sisters of Mercy, a new congregation conceived by Catherine Macaulay, an Irish woman born on September 29th, 1778. Taking a substantial inheritance given her by a family, the Callahans, to whom she had shown kindness, and rather than use it for her personal comfort, she opened the Mercy House in 1827. The choice of location was intentional. Catherine's purpose was to provide a refuge for disenfranchised women located in the midst of one of the most affluential neighborhoods in Dublin. Catherine said, the principal aim of the congregation is to educate poor girls, to lodge and maintain poor young women who are in danger, and to visit the sick poor. Her well-to-do neighbors were not pleased. Transformative kindness can be irritating and controversial. She struggled with her religious calling. She would become one of those rare figures in religious life that founded both a new religious community and also a way of religious life. These sisters would not be cloistered, as was the tradition. They would become known as the Walking Sisters, and walk they did across the globe. Over the next 2 centuries, they founded an impressive number of schools, hospitals, social services in 40 countries. A small band of sisters actually migrated to Cedar Rapids in 1875 to teach. Over these 150 years in the city alone, they founded My Hospital Mercy Medical Center, Mount Mercy University, the Catherine Macaulay Center, which is a social service resource dedicated to easing the transition of immigrants, to name just a few. Kindness transforms communities. Upon her imminent death, as she lay in her simple bedroom on the 2nd floor of Bagot Street, she instructed her devoted sisters that upon her passing, they should gather in community and enjoy a simple cup of tea. Kindness is humble and hospitable. As I speak, the sisters are aging, stoically accepting and preparing for their inevitable demise. Amor fati, one might say. And this is what inspires me. What started out as Catherine's blank canvas has emerged fully expressive. A radical idea conceived by one person, coupled with action, scaled worldwide, transforming countless lives and communities. The proof of love is deed, she would often say. Her walking sisters, ever dedicated to addressing bias, ill health, poverty, and justice, and now preparing for a new future in which kindness is contagious, does not require their presence to continue on, and has no expiry date. This notion inspires me, and in many ways, it is what I am attempting to achieve in the work that I'm engaging with. And it's the promise that I perceived in coming here for this week. So I want to end by just saying congratulations to you for the work that you have done. And I am so pleased to be welcomed in.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tim. We forget that the transitions that people are in are both organisational and individual, as well as systemic and structural. We're going to have to adapt slightly, as we will, to so many things going on. So we are going to continue straight through. I think, with a bit of luck, online is Mike Wamaya.
Yes.
Excellent. Hello. We've managed to maintain. I'm very good.
Dominic.
We managed to maintain a connection. It's a good thing. So, Mike.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Mike is the lead at Project Elimu in Kenya. Mike, we have about 10 minutes or so to kind of give us some background on the project and the challenges you face and how you're working. We've been listening to people talk who are based in very different contexts, who have very different challenges that they face, and they work in very different ways. One of the things that you and I have in common is that we start with the basis of fun, because frankly, if people don't enjoy it, they don't stay. So, I'd like to hand over to you, but I'm also going to ask you, can you sit slightly to your right?
To my right, like that?
Exactly like that. That's it. We have you centered. Perfect. Please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dominic, for having me. It was such a nice insight. I would love to start and introduce my work. I'm Mike Wamaya, and I'm a dance teacher based here in Nairobi, Kenya. Nairobi is quite warm right now, so we are enjoying every bit of it. I work in Kibera, which is one of the biggest informal settlements, and there we spread the joy of dance to young people and youths of our community. So Kibera is an informal settlement, which is looked at as one of the biggest informal settlement, but often what comes into people's minds is how disconnected things are, how certain things are not working. But it's also a space where there's so much joy, there's so much kindness, there's so much happiness, and most importantly, there's so much color, and we are part of that color. And the question have always been, how do we get young people to spread the love and kindness and empathy around them, and also to people besides just their own family neighborhoods? These have been a huge challenge because within our community, we do not have a lot of spaces where young people can hang out. We do not have a lot of spaces where young people can gather and just express themselves. And it is with this reason that we set up Project Elimu, which is on the next slide. And Project Elimu is an after-school space that we built ourselves with the support of our parents. And as you all might know, like when a community like ours, which is struggling so much to uplift itself, there's also a lot of aid coming in, and often some of this is ending towards the wrong reasons. But what happens if the community comes together and builds a long-lasting solution to the most pressing issues? For instance, spaces where young people can express themselves, spaces where young people children can be children and access play in a peaceful and a safe environment. So we set up Project Elimu, and we are non-academic program. So we dance, we skateboard, we play football, and most importantly, we feed the children to be able to gain access to at least 2 meals a day whenever they can at home. So our programs are divided in 4 segments. We have the arts education, which we run our Kibera Ballet School. And our Kibera Ballet School is such a special initiative whereby we do not believe in competitive ballet. So we give equal opportunity to children regardless of their abilities and strength. Every young child, every young girl you talk to, she wants to be a princess and she wants to show the talent in her. But often as they grow, they lose the track. So we created a space where regardless of your background, regardless of how expensive ballet is, we give it for free to children. We also have the Smile Club, which is a sexual reproductive health and rights. And this is always a sign of kindness that we give out to the wider community, because a lot, despite the milestones that our country is making, menstruation is still not being given key priorities when it comes to access to menstrual products and support. So we run a Smile Bank where you have to do good within your community, and good depends on what you do. You can fetch water for someone, you can help an older person in terms of getting their groceries, and in return, you can be honest to yourself and come to us and say, I have invested this number of hours into my own community and into people around me, and in return, you get menstrual products. And some of it is also given to boys who pass it on to their sisters or to their cousins. We also try to offer digital literacy, which is computers with no teachers in Kibra, and mostly is a space where children will just come in and have access to computers that are powered, and in that they will get to teach themselves newer ways of communicating, newer ways of internet safety, but most importantly, stay connected for the older youths. So on the next slide, we have that's our space. It's so crowded, but the beauty of this space is when we saw the need of building an art center, we came together as a community, and the parents of the children you're seeing there, some of them are carpenters, some of them are welders, and everybody came together, and we did not spend so much money in developing this space. We were so surprised that when we had it ready, it was filled with children from different parts of Kibera. And this really motivated us in terms of how best can we expand the program, how best do we scale what we are doing, but also how best do we make our project inclusive. So we tried as much as we could to also bring in like other activities, which you would see on the next slide, where we now have like a library, which is a very small library, but it serves its purpose because it has storybooks, it has magazines, and children are able to come in and pick a book at their own comfort, read. As we also emphasize, we do not force them to read. We encourage reading for pleasure. So you are just encouraged to pick a book and be part of that book, and also on top of it, develop your own story. On the next picture, you'd see our computer lab, which is not being used. And now that's our dance space. And what is so beautiful about this, and why I find our program so inspiring, we do ballet, but we do it with what we can find within our community. So when we started off, we thought we needed to have ballet tutus. And ballet tutus are super expensive and way not affordable to our local community. But that did not stop us from having these amazing tutus, because these were actually locally made by some of the parents within our school. So a group of parents came together and they designed our first ever ballet tutu that we used for a very big performance that we called the Voices of Kibra. Not only did this show highlight the the talent in our students. It also highlighted the talents in our parents and the resiliency of our community and how connected everyone is and how ready everyone is in sharing the knowledge that they do have. And our art program has been a very special part of also bringing the community together, because often we've also struggled with a lot of myths and taboos affecting children, especially children who are having learning disorders, children who are not able to talk, children living with various disabilities are often looked at as an outcast. So they're not brought out to play, they're not brought out to interact with other kids. And when we started dancing, we had one girl who came in and she couldn't talk, but she became a very amazing dancer. And it triggered a chain reaction to a wider community where more and more people started now letting children living with various disabilities join our activities and join our dance program. And these have been a very clear symbol of also we don't focus more on performance. We don't go to the theater, for instance, but the theater comes to us. We build our own theater in spaces where you can't have a dance space, but we turn that into a dance space. On the next slide is our menstrual products, which we offer, which of course is supported by various organizations around. But the students themselves initiated a project called the Smile Club. And the Smile Club developed a bank of its kind. And these were some of the products that we are using, and they're still using some of them. And the aim of it is to enable young people support each other. How do we get a boy to discuss issues around teenage pregnancy if he's not aware of menstrual products? So menstrual products became a huge symbol of our program, where we make sure every young girl, regardless of your background, you have access to it, and it's all for free as you grow through the program. On the next slide is our process. Our key focus is how do we get to change our own community, because we've seen a lot of initiatives being designed in various countries and brought to us and set up within our community. But how do we get our community to trigger the change from within? How do we initiate it? And we saw it through the construction of our dance space, where everybody came together, and at the end we had a dance studio, which was a huge struggle for us in the beginning. We were dancing in the sand outside, and we had a dance studio. So we thought, is there a possibility to develop more and more young people who can contribute positively to our community? So then we started doing more of using arts and sports as a tool to mobilize, educate, motivate our young learners to be towards the 21st century skills. And in that process, we got to develop more their digital literacy skills, their fitness is increasing, then teamwork and collaboration. And with all this, we've seen young people who are really doing a lot within our community as we speak. I have 4 students who are now in America doing their studies, and they came from Kibra, and no one knew how they would, what they would turn into, but it starts from just a dancing floor. And we also have young people in various universities in Kenya who are now actively taking over my work. So I'm slowly reducing on dancing as most of my students are taking over the work and also taking over to trigger creativity and resiliency amongst other children within our community. So on the other slide is our approach. So basically, we focus more on giving children the attention, and we focus on giving children to grow their expression and not on results that people want to see. So we would not, for instance, go to the National Theatre for a dance show, but we would instead push people to come to our community to see what we are doing within our community, and everything is centered around the child. So within the space, we've also created an environment where every child feels they belong there, regardless of their ability and disability, and regardless of their academic strengths. So they feel supported. And we've seen it when children feel supported, they encourage other children to also join the program. They encourage other children to speak up. They encourage other children to, when they have issues, for instance, a child is abused within the community, it is a collective responsibility of them to come in and try and find solution to that specific child. And we've also seen when we give the young ones play as a right and not a reward, because often in our schooling system, the bell will ring and everybody will run out, and now you'll be told it's now time to start playing. The bell rings again, and now everybody's pushed back and say, okay, now we're going to go ahead and start studying. But we focus more on letting the whole learning process be in a very playful manner. And we've seen with this, we've had a lot of improvement in our young people, because when we started off, there was a lot of teenage pregnancy within our program. But now we report actually none within the beneficiaries of our program, because they support each other and they also see the future, and they now believe in possibilities, because they know very well, if I'm lacking something, I can go to somebody else and I'll be able to get help. So our space is a very safe learning environment where young people have gained the confidence of coexistence, gained the confidence of working together, and gained the confidence of somebody's problem is actually my problem. So we merge it all together and we find solution as a team. So on the last slide, or last but not least, is we have seen, this is one of our performance we did in our community where we were integrating ballet and African dance all in one dancing area, and that is our theater. It is a community space. So what we do is we make a circle and we tie a rope around it. And once the music starts, lots and lots of people will come in, the parents will come in to be part of our show, and they would watch. So in that process of watching is when we also bring in other young people who initially were never looked at as performers. So children with various disabilities also get to show their strength and power. And so to me, I've always believed that poverty have always been something instilled in us, but it has a way that it blocks a child from developing their mind and growing it. But when we offer quality education and when we offer also access to play, there's a lot of healing that happens in that specific child's mind, and this triggers resiliency in that child, and everybody is able to make it regardless of their background and community. So that is briefly what we do. Of course, I can continue talking more and more, but briefly, that is our work, and you can find us at Project Elimu Kenya, and feel free to also reach out. And Dominic has my contacts, and Dominic, I hope I'll see you in Nairobi soon.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
So we wanted to put Vikram's work and Tim's work and Mike's work all together in one section, because they are examples of activating kindness. They are showing through the doing. And we're going to move swiftly into the next session. I'm going to invite Claire Howland to join me. And as she comes down, if we have chance, can we play Mike's video, which is 3 minutes long?
Eat, sleep, dance, repeat. Home to Kibera ballerinas. Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? If you are ready, say yes. Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? If you are ready, say yes.
Hapa ni project ana tuna feel better. Mimi ni Sparta natoka hapa tu Kibera. Nacheza ballet hadi na dance nazipenda. Nacheza ballet hadi na dance nazipenda. We have ballet, we
ngumu, walishindwa kupata sanitari ya kitru. Maboy child naye walikuwa na vurugu, lakini sahi wanacheza chini tukismart. Big up Mike Wamaya because ametupanga, because ametulinda na ametulipia. Big up Mike Wamaya because ametupanga, because ametulinda na ametulipia. Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? Are you ready for Project Elimu? If you are ready, say yes. Are you ready for Project Elimu?
So, we keep moving. We have to keep moving. Round of applause. Yeah.